Your organization does some incredible work in the Middle East, reaching people with the gospel. Can you talk a little bit about Transform Iran?
Transform Iran has transformation at heart, Billy. That's probably the easiest way to put it. We're thinking about our whole country. How do we ensure that the gospel really penetrates? How do we ensure that that powerful, life-changing, atmosphere-shifting gospel makes its way through every part of society, right from the most illiterate, destitute, to the most influential and powerful? Everyone needs the gospel, and we have that in mind.
It's interesting right now because a lot of people in America, they hear stories about the state of the spiritual condition there, in the Middle East in general, but in particular in Iran. And what can you tell us? If you had to summarize what it is like there when it comes to religious liberty, religious freedom, what would you say?
There is no religious liberty or freedom in Iran today. It's completely controlled and dictated by the authorities. Iran is an Islamic theocracy, and for all its faults, Iran has integrity in the sense that they do what they say they're going to do. They say they want an Islamic country. They want everyone to abide by Islamic laws, and they do everything in their power to make sure that happens. And that's right through to physical abuse, right through to control, political, legal systems and infrastructures that ensure people have no choice but to abide by Islamic laws. So in that context now, you're looking at a church that is growing and thriving because people are being forced to conform to something that is not life-giving, and they're rebelling against that, and they're looking for something different. And when they look, they're finding Jesus.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? Because when we talk about America and the lens through which we see things here, we have religious liberty, we have religious freedom here, and we have squabbles and debates and legal battles that are important, but there is freedom. There is a First Amendment, and you have so many numbers that show that at least culturally, there's a dwindling of faith, at least nominally in America, and yet you look over at a place where Christianity is not permitted, not allowed, and yet you have what you're describing as a growth and almost just this unprecedented sort of outpouring of faith. How, because it's so restricted, Christianity, and I would imagine any other faith outside of Islam, how do you and how does your organization reach people with that gospel message?
So we have to be creative. We have to use the modern day opportunities that the world gives us. So, we're now in an age where we have digital media in a way that our even just one or two generations ago didn't have. So we must make sure that we use these facilities, and we do. So when we talk to Iranians, we can't just walk the streets and evangelize in the way that you would normally think. And we certainly can't have great big meetings and invite people to those, because that would be very dangerous for everyone involved. So we have to find ways that we can communicate people where the recipient can stay anonymous and in a quiet location, in a safe location, and still be able to access the information. Of course, that then gives us digital media. So we're thinking satellite TV, radio, social media, and through all these different ways, we share the gospel. But we always give people the opportunity to contact us, because otherwise, of course, you're spreading all this great information. They don't know what to do with it. When they contact us in a response, that's when the relationship really takes flight. So they have questions. They may well have encountered Jesus in a dream or a vision. I'm sure we'll talk about that too. And they want to understand it. I've received a healing in my life. My addiction is gone. I'm no longer angry all the time. What's happening? Help me understand what this Jesus has done for me. So then we get to talk with them, share the gospel with them, and walk them through a process that sees them through discipleship and church planting quite often.
And that's incredible. I mean, I look at America right now, and again, we talk about that sort of dwindling of the nominal faith, and yet you have all this interest in aliens and all these other things that are going on. And I think, gosh, that's so fascinating to me because, I mean, it's a whole other conversation, right? But you have this really bizarre sort of spiritual thing happening in America, while at the same time you're having these moments of revival happen here in the US that are really interesting. And yet you juxtapose that to what you just described. And you mentioned one thing that I think is really interesting, the supernatural, I guess, dynamic of having dreams, having visions. I know you've called, Iran miracle territory, and we've heard so many stories of Muslims who didn't know a lot about Jesus outside of what they're taught in their faith, having visions and dreams and encounters with him. Talk a little bit about how prevalent is that in the Middle East in general, and in particular in Iran?
It is incredibly prevalent. There are different factors at play here. One of them is the cultural propensity and openness to that form of spiritual communication. People in that region generally believe in a higher authority. There must be a God. This is much more a question of what the nature of that God is and how does he communicate with us. So there's already an openness to hearing from God or even the prophets or angels. Middle Easterns are dreamers. We see that historical context right through the Old Testament. And of course, we're in that Middle Eastern territory right there, and God used dreams constantly in visions to speak. And I believe that's part of our heritage as a people group, to have that as a form of communication. So openness and our heritage, I think, are part of it. But I think the greatest factor here is the fact that the Lord will not be silenced. And there are humans here who are trying to silence the penetration of the gospel into a whole region, a whole country. They use censorship, they use threats, they persecute, they torture, they kill people who are either trying to spread that kind of information, about Jesus or about any other alternative to Islam, and those who are listening and responding, they're controlling and torturing and killing. So now in that context, Jesus turns around and goes, you can't silence me. You might be able to silence the media. You might be able to silence what the papers are saying, what media people are accessing through banning satellite dishes and internet limitations. But you can't stop me speaking to people in their dreams or walking right into their living room and having them experiencing a vision of me. And that's what he's doing.
Yeah, it's incredibly fascinating for you. Having the position that you have, seeing and hearing what you hear, are there any stories surrounding those visions, those dreams that stand out to you that have maybe enriched your faith as you've been on this journey?
So many. I think, and I'll share a couple with you. And I think the way that they generally grip me are, one, God's kindness. He is kind. He loves people. He loves humans, and he wants relationship with us. And we hear these stories of people that may not have had any other access, but God sees their heart. God sees if they're actually open, if they're wanting truth. And he is so willing to expose himself, share himself with them through whatever means necessary to have them hear him and see him. And that always encourages me. And then the other side is Christians who are already committed to Jesus and are prepared to serve him under incredibly difficult circumstances, how he consistently reveals himself to them and encourages them and strengthens them in ways that are supernatural, miraculous. And again, that's encouraging. It's also challenging because we have to ask ourselves here in the West, how are we living that takes away any kind of need for us to have this kind of thing happening in our lives? Are we so safe and so comfortable that God doesn't see the need to give us those kinds of strengthening, faith-building experiences? And that's the challenge to me every day. What am I doing to give God the opportunity, the need perhaps, to feel that he's going to have to come and talk to me in my dreams and direct me? So that's the challenge there.
Yeah, that's actually very convicting, right? Because again, when you start to obsess over the material and you're not open to anything, and we see this a lot even in the church today, a lot of Christians who are just not open to the things we see happening in Scripture. And I think you have to be discerning and careful, but at the same time, when you're closed off to anything, you really are maybe preventing something that should be happening, a dialogue that should be happening, or a message that should be coming. We should at least be entertaining that conversation about that. And I think to me, it's incredibly fascinating to hear that there are people in another country who are being restricted. Their rights are being, essentially they don't have any rights, who are having these encounters that change their life, as you were just describing. What would you say, and this is probably hard to choose, but out of all the stories, is there one that is sort of your favorite story that you've heard?
Oh, yeah. I do have a favorite, I think, right now. It changes depending on the season and what God is doing in that moment. But there's a lady in our ministry right now who has walked a very long and difficult path, and it started with a supernatural encounter with the Lord. And this is back to God's kindness, because she wasn't even looking for him, but she was desperately following Allah and desperately wanting to please Allah. And in that context, Jesus appeared to her and drew her to himself because he knew her heart. And I think that's so beautiful. And now she serves in the church, and I can give you the arc of her story, but it all began with her seeing visions of Jesus appear to her in her bedroom, putting his hand up to her and saying, trust me, follow me. And then he would double down with that in her dreams, and he would visit her in her dreams, and he would encourage her again to follow him and to trust him. This is all in the context of a woman who was forced into marriage at 12, had 3 children through her teens. Her husband, her brother, and her father were murdered by the Iranian government for their political activism. So she's now a single mother in her early 20s. Her husband's family, very devout Muslims. And the husband's family speaks for you as a woman. So now she kind of belongs to that family. And in that context, she's praying her Islamic prayers, and she's trying her best to be devout and a good Muslim. And Jesus starts appearing to her. And then one day when she was praying her prayers, every time she went to say the word Muhammad, the word Jesus would come out involuntarily. And she would catch herself and think, oh no, start again, that's not right. So she would pray again, Muhammad, and Jesus would come out. We know the name Jesus is so powerful. It's not just an ordinary name. And as she keeps saying this name, as she is praying, Jesus begins to touch her heart. And all of the backdrop of how he'd been visiting her and giving her space to get used to the idea that Jesus is kind and trustworthy, and he's inviting her to adventure with him. She ends up giving her life to the Lord right there while she's praying her Islamic prayers. She managed to get hold of a Bible, but of course it's dangerous for her, and she knows that her in-laws will turn her in if they know that she's a Christian. So she starts reading her Bible in secret in the restaurant. It's the only place where she has some privacy, where she can hide away for a couple of minutes and read. And she starts sharing about how God begins to transform her life so completely that there was no hiding it. It was really beginning to be evident that something had happened to her. And the light of Christ was all over her. So it comes to a point, I'm fast tracking a little bit, where she has to make a decision. Either she stays and almost certainly gets killed, or she escapes. But if she's going to escape, she can't take her children with her because the husband's family would have to authorize that. So she ends up escaping and having to leave her children behind. And then there's a whole long road there that she travels as a refugee, and as God begins to minister to her. And she says how her intimacy with Jesus grew so exponentially in that time of complete dependence on him and isolation otherwise. And she has story after story of Jesus appearing to her in a dream or in a vision and directing her to make a certain phone call or to go to a certain place and share his message with others. And as I was interviewing her in the summer, I was saying to her, okay, so help me understand, I have 3 children. I mean, I cannot even imagine the pain of that loss. And she said to me through tearful eyes, she said, I lost 3, but I gained 195 because now I'm here discipling 195 people who've got saved through my ministry.
Wow.
So that's a story of transformations. And it starts with Jesus appearing to someone who he knows is really looking for him. And she doesn't even have the words to articulate that properly, but he knew her heart and he spoke to her.
It's incredible to hear stories like that and the work that your organization is doing. How can people get involved? Whether it's not everybody can contribute financially, maybe there are other ways they can be supporting you. What are some of those tips you would have for people who want to make a difference in this arena?
Yeah, obviously the financial is a straightforward one, and I think everyone's aware of that. But there are other ways that we can help and we can be involved. This is such a great time in history to be involved in Christian mission because all the different parts are so easily interconnected because we get to communicate, we get to hear the testimonies, and we get to reach right across the ocean into a part of the world that we may otherwise have never been able to influence. And now here we are in the States and we can do that. So I always say the first step is to be informed. If whether we want to be praying properly, whether we want to be advocating, raising awareness, all of this requires a little bit of effort from us to get our facts straight. I mean, the first thing is to know that God really is working. Iran is not a hopeless nation. Incredible things are happening. The church is advancing at a rapid, unprecedented rate. People are hungry. The greatest problem, if you want to call it that we have in Iran is how do we nurture this fast-growing church, these rapidly adding converts? How do we plug them in? How do we train them? How do we make sure that they're rooted in the Bible, that heresy doesn't creep in? Now, these are good problems to have. So I would encourage people to get on our website, transformiran.com. There are all sorts of ways there that you can learn about what's happening in Iran, whether you want to test the needs or you want to learn about how the country works, the needs that people are facing today. You can sign up for a newsletter and have monthly prayer updates. And then you can really partner in prayer effectively. We'll be telling you this part of the ministry is struggling, all the children are sick, or pray for marriages they're under attack, or pray for this project that's about to be launched. We're anticipating attack. So you can really get specific in the Holy Spirit, in prayer with us, and be combating these things in spiritual warfare with us. And the other thing is awareness. People just don't know. And we need help in, simple things like social media, following us on social media, liking, sharing, all the very obvious things that we can do that help this message get out so that people can know, wow, God is doing amazing things in a country that we thought was completely beyond reach.
Well, I so appreciate you taking the time breaking this down. We're looking forward to having you back again soon. There's so much to talk about, and we've just scratched the surface, but I appreciate you taking us through it all.
Anytime, Vinny. Thank you.